Warning! Kinda Murdery contains adult themes, explicit language, and descriptions of violence. It is not suitable for anyone, and we recommend you stop listening now.
Hello everyone, and welcome to Kinda Murdery, a true crime podcast that's mostly about murder, and always about the strange and compelling stories that arise when the path less traveled twists to darkness, and those who walk its shadows surrender to violence and corruption. I'm your host, Zevin Odelberg, and we have a perilous journey ahead, so thank you for lending me your courage and good company. We have arrived at Part 3, the thrilling conclusion of Where is Leonardo Notarbartolo, Mastermind of the Antwerp diamond heist. Notice that I said Part 3, so if you haven't heard the first two parts yet, go back and listen to them, and then rejoin us. I'll be sure to save you a seat. As always, my sources are in the show notes, and I will rewind the story just slightly to allow you to settle back into the narrative. So if you're ready, I suggest that you put your personal items underneath the seat in front of you, stow your carry-on in the overhead compartment, let go of the worries of the day, but be sure your seatbelt is fastened. There's turbulence expected ahead. Kinda Murderies. Where is Leonardo Notarbartolo, Mastermind of the Antwerp diamond heist? The thrilling conclusion starts now. Since they'd memorized the layout of the vault and the replica, they worked in the dark, turning on their flashlights only for split seconds, enough to position the drill over the next box. But in those muffled flashes, they could glimpse their duffel bags overflowing with gold bars, millions in Israeli, Swiss, American, European, and British currency, and leather satchels that contained the mother lode, rough and polished diamonds. They resisted the urge to examine their haul. They were running out of time. By 5:30 a.m., they'd opened 109 boxes. A tamped-down giddiness pervaded the dark vault, but they had to stop. The streets would fill with people soon, and they needed to transfer their bags into Notarbartolo's car. Speedy relayed the message to him. They were coming out. It took almost an hour for the team to haul the bags up the stairs past the infrared sensor, then lower the loot down the ladder and gather in the hallway of the decrepit office building. Notarbartolo idled at the curb while on the phone with Speedy. A bus came and went, and then the street was empty. "Now!" he hissed. In the pre-dawn half-light, the four men raced out of the building. They jammed their bags into the car, slammed the doors, and headed off on foot for Notarbartolo's apartment. He put the car in gear and slowly pulled away. In half an hour, they were huddled around the bags in the apartment. The monster unzipped one and pulled out a leather satchel. It was time to celebrate. He opened the satchel and looked up, bewildered. It was empty. He took out another one. It was also empty. A wave of anxiety swept the room. They unzipped all the other duffel bags and rifled through the satchels. More often than not, there was nothing in them. Something had gone wrong. The diamonds should have been there. "We've been set up," Notarbartolo said. Notarbartolo stepped into a scalding hot shower while the others made salami sandwiches in the kitchen. He needed some clarity. The fatigue was weighing on him. In the weeks preceding the heist, he'd seen many of the satchels in the offices of the diamantaires, and they were always filled with inventory. He expected the total take to exceed 100 million. Now they were looking at a fraction of that, probably about 20 million. Notarbartolo reflected on his interactions with the diamond dealer, and a thought flashed through his mind. Maybe the dealer wasn't operating alone. If he tipped off a group of his fellow merchants, they could have pulled their inventory out of the vault before the heist. Each could then claim that their gems were stolen and collect the insurance while secretly keeping their stones. Most had safes in their offices. They could have simply kept the stocks there. Notarbartolo realized that the heist he had spent so much time planting might have actually been part of an elaborate insurance scam. He shut off the water. A half an hour earlier he was king. Now he felt like a pawn. Speedy and Notarbartolo were on the E19 heading out of Antwerp. It was 6 o'clock on Sunday evening. Notarbartolo settled for the 10-hour drive back to Turin. The garbage bag filled with incriminating evidence sat in the back seat. Notarbartolo planned to stop in France and burn it, leaving no trace of the crime. But Speedy was having trouble. His face was ashen, and his eyes darted madly at the cars around them. Finally, after only 20 minutes on the road, he snapped. "I can't do the drive," he said. The guy was melting down. Notarbartolo told him to take it easy. He'd drop him at the train station in Brussels if that's what he wanted. It might actually be nicer to do this trip without his friend driving him crazy. "You can't take the garbage into Brussels," Speedy stammered. The city was crawling with cops. Maybe they'd be looking for them. They couldn't run the risk. They had to drop the bag immediately. "Pull off up here," he said abruptly from the passenger seat. "This is a ridiculous time to be having a panic attack," Notarbartolo muttered. "Just pull off," his friend snapped. Notarbartolo took the exit and surveyed the darkened surroundings. "There's a dirt road," Speedy said, peering into the forest. "It'll be perfect." August Van Camp likes weasels. The 59-year-old retired Belgian grocer had two. He called them Mickey and Minnie, and he enjoyed sending them down holes in the forest. Typically, a rabbit came rocketing out the other end. It was a lot of fun. In 1998, he bought a narrow strip of forest along the E19 motorway. It was about a 5-minute drive from his house, and if you ignored the sound of cars hurtling past at 80 miles an hour, it was a pretty 12 acres of trees and a gurgling stream. There were also lots of holes with rabbits in them. But because it adjoined the highway, Van Camp found a lot of garbage. The local teenagers once decided to have a party there and burn down a little hut he built. It made him fume with anger. When he found garbage, he phoned the police who'd gotten used to his calls. This is how a typical conversation went. "The kids made a mess on my land again." "Well, I'm sorry to hear that, Mr. Van Camp. I demand that you send someone to investigate. We will pass along your request." Van Camp rarely heard back. But it was the garbage that Van Camp found on his property that led to Notarbartolo's arrest. While hunting one morning, Monday, February 17th to be exact, Van Camp was incensed to find yet another pile of junk in the underbrush. After a flash of pique that made him puff out his cheeks, throw up his arms, and wonder what the world was coming to, he knelt down and glared at the refuse. He wanted to be able to describe to the cops what it was that he had to put up with. There was videotape strewn all over the place. A wine bottle rested near a half-eaten salami sandwich. There was also some white envelopes printed with the words Diamond Center, Antwerp. Van Camp's irritation increased. At home, he punched in the number for the police and asked to lodge a complaint. The officer listened as Van Camp tallied the mess. When Van Camp mentioned Diamond Center envelopes, the officer broke in. "What was that?" he said. "Antwerp Diamond Center envelopes," Van Camp sputtered. This time the police came running. By mid-afternoon, a half-dozen detectives swarmed the forest, painstakingly gathering the garbage and collecting stray gems. Van Camp watched with satisfaction. The police were finally treating his litter situation with the proper respect. Within hours, the trash began to fill the evidence room at the Diamond Squad headquarters in Antwerp. A member of the squad bent over the clear plastic bags, looking for immediate clues. A pile of torn papers seemed promising. It didn't take long to reassemble the pieces like a jigsaw puzzle. It was an invoice for a low-light video surveillance system. The buyer was Leonardo Notarbartolo. Back at Van Camp's property, another detective knelt among the thorny brambles and peered at a small, jagged piece of paper poking out of the mud. He carefully lifted it free and held it up to the light. It was a business card that bore the address and phone number of Elio Dionorio, an Italian electronics expert tied to a series of robberies. Notarbartolo has consistently refused to identify his accomplices, but all evidence indicates that Dionorio is the genius. The lab techs also bagged a half-eaten salami sandwich. They found Antipasto Italiano salami packaging nearby and sent it along to Diamond Squad headquarters. 4 days later, the detectives executed a search warrant on the apartment Notarbartolo rented in Antwerp. In a cupboard, they found a receipt from a local grocery store for Antipasto Italiano salami. The receipt had a timestamp. A detective drove to the grocery and asked the manager to rewind his closed-circuit television to 12:56 p.m. on Thursday, February 13th. When the video came to a halt and snapped into focus, there was an image of a tall, muscular Italian purchasing salami. His name? Ferdinando Finotto, the man most likely known as the Monster. On Monday, about 36 hours after the job was completed, the team of thieves reassembled at a bar in Adro, Italy, a small town about 50 miles northeast of Milan. They had agreed to meet the diamond dealer there and divide the loot. The dealer would get a third for financing the operation and putting the team together. The others would split the rest. They had anticipated a haul in the tens of millions each. Now they were looking at roughly $3 million per man. It was still a lot of money, but they couldn't help feeling they'd been played. Everybody had a lot of questions for the dealer. Hour after hour, he didn't arrive. Notarbartolo was already uneasy about what had happened in the forest. He knew he'd made a mistake. He should have turned around after he dropped off Speedy at the train station and gone back to burn the garbage. It was an embarrassing oversight, But what really irked him was that he'd vouched for his friend and the guy had cracked. They waited at the bar until closing, drinking espressos and then beer. The dealer never showed. On Thursday night, Notarbartolo ate dinner with his family at home outside of Turin. He tried to pretend that everything was normal. As usual, his 3-year-old granddaughter played with his cell phone and made him laugh. He momentarily forgot his worries. His biggest problem was that he needed to get back to Belgium. The rental car was due in Antwerp the next day. The plan had always been to return it and show his face at the Diamond Center. That way, if the cops were looking for tenants who'd disappeared, he wouldn't be on the list. It would also give him an opportunity to clean his apartment more thoroughly. He told his family that he'd be leaving early the next morning. His wife decided to come along. She hadn't seen much of him lately. They even had a nice dinner party with some friends from the Netherlands. The next morning, as the Notarbartolos blew through the Swiss Alps, the police surrounded their home in Italy. Acting on the surveillance system invoice discovered on Van Camp's land, the Belgian diamond detectives had asked the Italian police to search Notarbartolo's house. His 24-year-old son, Marco, was there and refused to open the front door. He frantically dialed his father's cell phone while the police smashed the door open. In Notarbartolo's jacket pocket, his phone flashed but made no sound. His grandfather had accidentally turned off the ringer the night before. Marco called his mother's phone. It was turned off. He tried his dad's phone repeatedly. It just rang and rang. Unaware, Notarbartolo sped toward Antwerp. As Notarbartolo drove back to Belgium, Pease and De Brucker wondered whether they'd ever catch the thieves. They could be anywhere by now. Brazil, Thailand, Russia. It never occurred to the detectives that one of the robbers would walk right back into the district. But that's exactly what Notarbartolo did. While one of his friends from the Netherlands waited on the street outside the Diamond Center, Notarbartolo waved at the security guard and dropped in to collect his mail. The guard knew that the police were investigating Notarbartolo and phoned the building manager, who immediately called the detectives. When the police arrived, they found Notarbartolo chatting with the building manager and began peppering him with questions. The friend took off as Notarbartolo stalled for time. He pretended to have trouble understanding French and claimed he couldn't remember the exact address of his own apartment. He just knew how to walk there. "Well, let's go then," Pease said and loaded the Italian into a car. Eventually, Notarbartolo pointed out the apartment. As the police car pulled up to the curb, Notarbartolo's wife and the friends who'd come for dinner stepped out of the building. They were loaded down with bags, and one carried a rolled-up carpet. Another minute, and they would have been gone. The police took everyone into custody. The bags contained critical evidence. The police dug out a series of prepaid SIM cards that were linked to cell phones used almost exclusively to call 3 Italians: Elio Leonardo, aka the Genius, Ferdinando Finotto, alias the Monster, and the person most likely to be Speedy, an anxious, paranoid man named Pietro Tavano, a longtime associate of Notarbartolo's. On the night of the heist, a cell tower in the Diamond District logged the presence of all 3, plus Notarbartolo. During that time, Tavano stayed in constant contact with Notarbartolo. The day Notarbartolo was arrested, Italian police broke open the safe at his home in Turin. They found 17 polished diamonds attached to certificates that the Belgian diamond detectives traced back to the vault. More gems were vacuumed out of the rolled-up carpet from Notarbartolo's Antwerp apartment. The Belgian courts found Notarbartolo guilty of orchestrating the heist and sentenced him to 10 years. Gosh, I don't know if I'm just a medieval American or something, but 10 years for stealing 20 million worth of diamonds? I don't know, seems like kind of a light sentence to me, especially because the vast majority of the loot was never discovered. Cell phone records and the oddly precise salami sandwich evidence, the Belgian detectives persuaded French police to raid the home of Finotto's girlfriend on the French Riviera. They retrieved marked $100 bills that the detectives say belonged to one of the Diamond Center's victims. Legal proceedings dragged on, but Finotto was finally arrested in Italy in November 2007 and began serving a 5-year sentence there. When questioned by police in Italy, Leonardo admitted that he had installed security cameras in Notarbartolo's office, but denied any involvement in the crime. Nonetheless, his DNA was found on some adhesive tape left in the vault. He was extradited to Belgium in November 2007, where he began to serve a 5-year sentence. The high-strung Pietro Tavano, also known as Speedy, the man arguably responsible for the capture of all the thieves, given that he had an absolute meltdown and just willy-nilly scattered the trash where it could easily be found, well, he refused to allow his attorney to make any statements on his behalf and also served a 5-year sentence in Italy for the crime. A 5th thief has never been identified, though police know of his existence via cell phone records and DNA traces. Nevertheless, the King of Keys is still anonymous, and has never been apprehended. On January 4th, 2009, reporter Joshua Davis from Wired magazine saw Notarbartolo for the last time. Over 14 weeks, he'd met with the Heist's mastermind 7 times in the prison visiting room, and yet questions remained. Was $100 million stolen as the police estimate, or just $20 million as Notarbartolo insists? Does it make sense that the heist was part of a larger insurance scam, or is Notarbartolo's story a decoy to throw suspicion on others? Perhaps Notarbartolo's cousin, the Mafia Don, was behind the whole thing. Whatever the truth, and this is what I'd really like to know, where is the loot now? The murky nature of the diamond trade makes it difficult to get clear answers. For instance, Detective De Brucker says that 3/4 of the business is done under the table. Since there were roughly $25 million in legitimate claims at the time of the heist, he calculated that at least another $75 million in goods was stolen. That brought the total value of the heist to about $100 million. If Notarbartolo's insurance scam is correct, it went down like this. The dealers who were in on it removed their goods, both legal and illegal, from the vault before the heist and then filed claims on the legitimate gems. Denise Oliver, the insurance adjuster who investigated the robbery for insurers, calls this the, quote, double whammy, unquote. The dealers would have gotten their insurance payouts and kept the stock. As for the $20 million that Notarbartolo and his crew got their hands on, well, that would have belonged to diamond traders not involved in the scam. Or there was no insurance scam. The thieves actually did find $100 million in the vault, and Notarbartolo spun the story to cloud the true origins of the heist. Regardless of which theory is correct, there is agreement that the thieves got away with millions that was never recovered. Notarbartolo refuses to talk about what happened to the goods. So that's the story of the diamond heist, right up until Leonardo Notarbartolo was initially paroled from prison in 2009. By the way, they came up with a great name for Notarbartolo and his crew, the men who carried out the Antwerp diamond heist. They're called La Scuola di Torino, the School of Turin. Alright, so back to Leonardo. The heist, as we discussed, took place in 2003. In 2005, he was convicted to 10 years in prison by the Belgian courts, which would have kept him in prison until 2015. However, he was paroled in 2009. But then, in 2011, a European arrest warrant was issued against him after he was found to have violated his parole conditions. In particular, one of the conditions of Notarbartolo's parole was that he compensate the victims of the heist, which he never made any attempt to do. As a consequence, 2 years after the warrant was issued, he was arrested again in 2013 at the Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris during a layover from the United States to Turin. And he was made to serve out the remainder of his original prison sentence, which put him back in prison until 2017. Well, here's the thing. Notarbartolo was the last of the School of Turin to be in prison. So, Notarbartolo has been out of prison for approximately 5 years, and try as I might, other than a years-old single-line entry in Notarbartolo's Wikipedia stating that he had been rearrested for parole violations in 2013 and was expected to be in prison until 2017, I could find, after many hours of searching, absolutely no information about the location of any of the members of the School of Turin. Meanwhile, the majority of either $20 million or $100 million in diamonds and other loot is unrecovered, which means it's out there somewhere. And that's why, although I don't have an answer for you, I would very much like to know the answer to the question, where is Leonardo Notarbartolo, mastermind of the Antwerp diamond heist? Also, I guess I don't really understand how international law enforcement works, but it does just seem bizarre to me that all of the criminals would be given relatively short prison sentences that saw them released without the loot being recovered. I mean, gosh, if you can steal $100 million in diamonds and only go away for 5 or maybe 10 years with location of diamonds still unknown, that seems like a trade-off that more than one criminal, and maybe even more than one honest person, would be in a hurry to make. Alright, before I let you go, I'd like to quickly remind you about the 3-digit lifeline number 988 that you can call to receive immediate counseling for substance use, mental health, or suicidal thoughts. So, If you find yourself in acute crisis, please do remember, program it into your phone right now, the 3-digit lifeline number 988, and please do call it to receive that immediate help. But if you're not in acute crisis, and you'd just like to connect with someone, please don't hesitate to reach out to me, at Murdery on all social media, or kindofmurdery@gmail.com. I'm here, I care, and I would love to connect with you. And please, 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 always remember that the world is a better place with you in it. Speaking of reaching out to connect, over the holidays I received an incredible email, an incredible story from listener Amy Sarin. I referenced it obliquely a couple episodes ago, but I finally get to tell it now. And let me tell you, her story is just as heartrending, strange, and bizarre, and at times exciting, and frankly kinda murdery, as anything you might encounter in a book, or a TV show, or a movie. And I look forward to sharing more about it with you on January 8th. That's this coming Sunday. Until then, I'm Zevin Odelberg, and this has been Kinda Murdery.